Lee and Blake Lovell here of Southeastern 14, ready to break down our final SEC football power rankings for the 2022 season. Blake, we start at the bottom as we always do. Vanderbilt checks in at number 14. The Commodores moved temporarily out of that spot. And frankly, 5-7 was a big success for Clark Lee, but a weird season. Vanderbilt begins the season with a 50-point plus blowout of Hawaii and gets blown out 3 times by 50 plus. So the computers weren't huge fans of the Commodores, but the win-loss record at 5-7, it was. There were 2 other teams that could say the same, which were Auburn and A&M. But anyway, those are the bottom 3 in our rankings. We go Vandy 14, Auburn 13, A&M 12, and of course A&M would be the disappointing squad of the bunch, and Auburn had the sort of the self-implosion of the Brian Harsin era that came to an end.
Yeah, I kind of laugh with you about this. I mean, it's so strange because we're doing this on January the 10th, and think about how different so many programs are now, both roster wise, new head coaches, like, and the season's only been over regular season for like a month, right? But just think about how
Right.
quickly things move in college football now, given transfers and all that head coaching hires and everything. And like it's strange to even be like, oh yeah, I forgot that happened, but that was like a month
Yeah.
ago, and it's just that there's so much with everything. But yeah, I mean, looking back, I had to kind of look back at mine, and as always, these are our staff composite rankings. We have more input from different staff members than we do just in our basketball power rankings, which is just you and I. But yeah, I mean, this is one where I think Vanderbilt had those 2 nice wins, down the stretch there, to kind of get off of that losing streak. But at the end of the day, I think you saw A&M beat LSU, and Auburn obviously did some good things down the stretch. But I think it was pretty clear once we got to that point. These were the bottom 3 teams, because these are the teams that didn't make a bowl game, and I just think A&M clearly the most disappointing team this season. But Vanderbilt did some good things to kind of move forward. And of course, Auburn starts over now with Hugh Freeze. So
Okay, checking in at number 11. Man, this season had so much promise. I jinxed Florida. I'm the one that said before the Vandy game, I thought Florida would come in and win that one fairly easily. I thought it was a bad matchup. And then, man, losing to Vandy and Nashville just sent the Gators spiraling. They finish at 3-5 in the SEC and 6-7 overall. Anthony Richardson's gone for the league. And this is a tier where there's not a lot of difference, say, in the next 3 or 4 teams, but I think Florida sort of has to wind up as the bottom of this tier by virtue of its faceplant to end the season.
yeah, I mean, it was not a great finish to say the least. And I mean, I say that. I mean, they played well at Florida State. But I think we have to keep that in mind. Again, that game feels like it was a century ago, but it was basically almost 2 months ago now, a month and a half. That was a pretty good game, and so I think from that standpoint, nobody played, in the bowl game, so I don't really know that you can weigh that too much just based on all the guys that didn't play. But yeah, the loss to Vanderbilt was one that was not great given where they were, because we thought they did some things well against Georgia, even though they lost that game, by 3 touchdowns. But as we know, still have a lot of teams to Georgia this season. Beat A&M, beat South Carolina. But yeah, I mean, now it's looking forward for the Gators, and like we said, I mean, it's I don't know. There's still a lot of work to do there. The defense was never really, that was a problem, and we knew that early on. And from there, now, as you said, their quarterback heads to the NFL, and there will be some personnel changes. I think they felt good about where they were signing day wise, and yeah, we'll see where things go from here.
The next one is the last in our series of 5 teams that finished with a losing record. That's Missouri. Missouri had some high points and some low points, lost that weird game to Kentucky, came closer than anybody to beating Georgia, and lost the bowl game in the end. And when the dust settles, the Tigers end up at 6-7 and 3-5 in the SEC. And this seems like a program that's sort of been in that range for a bit now, Blake.
Yep, strange season for Missouri. Some blowout losses, some surprising wins. a surprising close loss. They kind of did everything, felt like, this season. And of course, as we know, they lose some key players. Dominic Lovett's gone and so forth. So that'll certainly factor in when we look ahead, maybe to next season. But yeah, they've kind of just stuck in this range. I feel like Missouri, I want to say, never gets too high, never gets too low, but there are a lot of highs and lows. It's just, yeah, it's kind of a roller coaster sometimes. And yeah, that kind of explains the season, I think, for Missouri. We said the defense was good enough to keep them in a lot of different games, but at the same time, they just, some of those you certainly want back. And could have been a completely different season, but you know what? We can say about a lot of teams every year, and Missouri felt like one of those teams this season that just a couple things change, break their way. What happens if they beat Georgia? I mean, think about how different the season is for everybody. And so it's
Yeah.
so many things like that. And but yeah, nonetheless, 6-7 finish for the Tigers.
Yeah, this is where we really get to the roller coaster portion. Kentucky, man, Kentucky was ranked in the top 10 for what, 2 weeks? Ends up scoring 0 points in a bowl game, loses to Iowa here in our backyard, goes 7-6 and 3-5. Kentucky ends the season as our number 9 team, and frankly, it might even be, we could debate a spot or two too high.
Yeah, another tale of a team that's just going to look completely different in certain spots. Obviously Will Levis exits, but Devin Leary comes in. Yeah, I mean, it's all those things like that, and I think that's where with Kentucky, it's disappointing because you look back and you think about early on. You were kind of the one that was a little hesitant. I think Blaine and I think picked Kentucky to beat Ole Miss, and that's what we say, right? Think about how different things are if they win a game like that. That kind of came down to the wire there, and how does that change the trajectory of their season? They turn around the following week, lose at home to South Carolina, without Levis. And yeah, things from there just never felt right for Kentucky. And, some close calls. But at the end of the day, I think they underachieved offensively. That's why they have a new they have a new offensive coordinator who's an old offensive coordinator in a sense. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's changes needed to be made. And I think that they will now go into next season resetting things on the offensive side of the ball with a new quarterback that, quite frankly, just can have just as, I think the expectations are going to be just as high for what, he can do compared to what the expectations were for Levis. And obviously bring someone in, Liam Cohen, that there are a lot of high expectations for as well to get this offense turned around.
Okay, number 8, Arkansas. And I could argue Arkansas even deserves to be a spot higher, but the Hogs, we talked about that schedule. Arkansas ends the season with a wild and thrilling, although not always thrilling in the way Arkansas fans wanted it, bowl win over Kansas. Again, 7-6, 3-5 overall, and just some really wild swings to the Razorbacks season under Sam Pittman.
Yep. Injuries and defense, I feel like were a main theme for Arkansas this season. We kind of talked about that a while back. Just a lot of, again, another team that had just some wild games. And, you go way back and you think about the A&M game, right? And how different things are with that game against A&M if they find a way to win that one. And boy, how much worse it gets for A&M if A&M loses that one. The Alabama game, think about the swings in that game. Just all of just so many different things. Like you said, you could point out a lot of different, the Liberty game, the LSU game, they're right there, but just can't find a way. So yeah, I mean, just a team that I think what Arkansas lacked was pretty easy, and I think it was just consistency. And I think again, injuries played into that. The defense certainly played into that, but just never felt like they were consistent week in and week out. Just kind of a lot of swings back and forth, and that led to I think a disappointing season in the sense of maybe what the expectations were after they got off to a 3-0 start. But as we said, their schedule was just brutal, and there was never an off week for Arkansas, in a sense, on the schedule at least. You had a bye week, but the schedule just never let up. And yeah, that resulted in several losses. And, again, it's just not having that sort of break in there with a schedule like that. It was tough to navigate. So.
Okay, before we get to the top half of our countdown, betting $11 to win $10 stinks. With BroThrow, you can bet $10 to win $10. It lets you bet in all 50 states because it's not the house. Bettors have a fair chance at winning. It is the only sports betting platform that doesn't take a cut of every bet. You don't have to deposit money into a BroThrow account. No deposits, no minimum bets, no need to connect your bank account. Bettors pay each other directly. There's a hassle-free sign-up process that lets you get in on the action in seconds. Go to brothrow.com/SE14. You can see that in our ticker and help out the folks who help our channel. Okay, Ole Miss finishes 8-5, but was what, 7-0 at one point, 6-0? I don't remember. It finishes 4-4 in the league. And speaking of face planting down the stretch, that's really what Ole Miss did. It was just kind of an empty calorie season for the Rebels. I mean, you go back and the South Alabama win, the win over Troy, wrong Sun Belt team to open the season, was better than people realized. But Ole Miss kind of feasted on an easy early schedule, and then when it mattered, you had the distraction with Lane Kiffin and Auburn, and that probably helped sink Ole Miss's season to some degree, I would have to think.
Well, I mean, we weren't surprised at all that they were 7-0 because, as we said, the first half of the schedule set up that way, and you just felt like everything was in their favor. If they won that Kentucky game, they were probably going to be 7-0, and they were. And then they go to Baton Rouge, and things just sort of fall apart from there. The way they lost that game at LSU, I think, again, right? You play the what if game. What if they lose that game by a field goal or a touchdown? Versus 25 and really never feeling like they had a chance to win that game. I think that just can really hurt your momentum a bit. And from there, they find a way to beat A&M on the road. Wasn't pretty. Had their chances, I guess you could say, against Alabama, but they just could not. Some of those close games that they needed to win, or some of those big games they needed to win, to perhaps be the SEC West champion. They just could not, make enough plays in those games to get it done. And then, like we said, it feels like the last 2 weeks of the season were longer than any during the entire season for Ole Miss, just based on everything with Lane Kiffin and wondering if he's going to leave for Auburn and the stuff on social media and just a whirlwind. And as we said, no, not we weren't surprised at all. I don't think that they lost the bowl game. I think we probably picked them, but not surprised at all, just given just what a wild end it was to the season and how much they had struggled and having the off the field distractions and all that combined. It sets up for as we said, I mean, it sets up for a pretty interesting season for Lane Kiffin heading into next year because, yeah, it was, it almost right. It's like you wouldn't want it either way, but you almost wish you started 0-4 and then just won your final 8 games or something, because you'd have a lot more positive momentum going into the offseason if you're going to do it that way. But instead, I feel like they have, I mean, aside from what probably A&M, Vanderbilt built a little momentum down the stretch, but I mean, Ole Miss is bottom 4 in terms of actual like momentum heading into the offseason and into next season, just based on how they finished this season, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I think the end created a lot of doubt heading into next season. Well, we'll see how that holds up. Lane Kiffin's going to rebuild his roster
I was
through
gonna
the
say,
transfer
that's the
portal, and
thing, right? Think about that. We can say all this stuff,
right,
but think about teams that have already rebuilt their roster in the transfer portal and the signing classes. We're just trying to keep this in the scope of this past season, but we have to kind of tie it into next season, which again,
sure.
think about how much things have already changed in the span of a month, basically. So,
Yeah, speaking of weird seasons, South Carolina, I don't know, early November looked like a team heading nowhere, and then just gets the college football shocker of the season in demolishing Tennessee. Follows that up with the win at Clemson, where Clemson hadn't lost at home in 40 something games. I don't remember what the streak was, but it was a lot.
yeah.
Then you're thinking, hey, they got a shot to really finish strong, go 9-4, beat Notre Dame in a bowl, in one that would have meant something. And then you got a bunch of players hit the portal or declare for the draft and sit that one out. And then Carolina loses a wild one to the Irish in a bowl game to finish 8-5.
Yeah, as I say, that's kind of the opposite of Ole Miss, where you start the season, Yeah, they had some nice wins. They had some wins where we didn't really know what to make of them, and then they pop up and win that game at Kentucky, and then all of a sudden you're like, all right, you got some momentum, right? Well, then, as we said, then it was just kind of the roller coaster of the final whatever several games. They go beat South Carolina, excuse me, Missouri beats them at home. Um, then they turn around and go to Vanderbilt. Didn't play great there, and then they go get blown out at Florida, and they blow out Tennessee, and then they win at Clemson. Just yeah, I mean, you could if you played that scenario out 10 times, that final whatever 5 games of the season, it's crazy to think how different that would be in all the different
Blake, if that's a video game
simulations, right?
and it spits out that
God,
you throw the game out, you delete it from your computer and say
yeah,
this
like there's
doesn't happen like this,
I was gonna
right?
say, like, if you did that, there is no way if you simulated that 10 times, there's no way that at any point in those 10 times, 2 times in a row in consecutive simulations, would you get the same result. Like, it just that's how wacky things were, but like we said, that's the difference in a South Carolina and Ole Miss because South Carolina has all this momentum. Even they lost the bowl game, right? They look good in the bowl game. They didn't play bad at all in the
Yeah.
bowl game. So I think,
A lot of parts missing in the bowl game.
I was gonna say they didn't even have their full squad there. So I think we make the phrases about the Beamer ball and all that, but as we pointed out when we did our kind of bowl game reaction to that game and kind of looked ahead, we said state of the program in great shape just because
Yeah.
they're moving along. They finally got some of those defining wins. Beating a Tennessee, beating a South Carolina, you can build off of that. That helps you in recruiting. That helps you in all kinds of areas, and they can use that now moving forward. They already are, and yeah, I think you have a lot more confidence in where the Gamecocks are.
Number 5, a solid 5, Mississippi State, the only 9-4 team in the league. State had a tough schedule, went 4-4 in the league. Of course, lost Coach Mike Leach. Our condolences continue to go to the Mississippi State family. State ends its season with a wild win in a bowl game, last-minute field goal followed by touchdown return craziness off a lateral, and State ends the season 9-4 and under a different direction in Coach Zach Arnett.
Yep, I mean, again, certainly on the field, a nice finish. Getting that win at Ole Miss. That just kind of, as we said, I mean, just given kind of the setup for that game, it was a great opportunity. They took advantage of that, and certainly you could not have predicted what came between that and the bowl game. But it is like it's just reflecting on the season now, knowing what has happened, and now knowing that again, Zach Arnett will be in the position now to move this program forward. And as we talked about before, I think he'll certainly lean on a lot of things that Mike Leach did right there, and getting them, to this point to where they did have a chance to have a season like this. And now we just kind of see how they continue to build as a program. But it was, on the field, as we said, they did a lot of things well this season. You and I were talking about the defense early in the season and some of the things that they could do there, and certainly the offense. You knew what to expect, even though they ran into some tough road games, and ran into Georgia like everybody else. It just still, I mean, I think you come out of this season with a lot of positives in terms of the on the field product and everything you saw there. And now again, the question just becomes, moving forward with Zach Arnett, what are some of the things that we start to see them continue to improve on? What do they kind of tweak to maybe try to take that next step into that SEC West champion conversation? But nonetheless, I mean, a 9-4 season for Mississippi State, yeah, you that was a great season again, just on the field. So
Okay, the next two programs, probably nobody's had more positive upward momentum, save maybe South Carolina, than these two. LSU at number 4. The SEC West champ goes 10-4, 6-2 in the league, and just beats Purdue into oblivion in the bowl game. LSU is season or two seems to me away from contending right back at the top, both in the league and nationally.
yeah, I mean, again, they're the reigning SEC West champion, and they're ranked 4th here, and we obviously have another SEC West participant ranked ahead of them. But I mean, from game one, I'll say the same thing I've said, like, right. And I think it's even better now as you use the bowl game as the last, sample size of the 2022 season. From game one to game whatever, 14, I just don't think there was another team that improved as much as LSU did. And, I mean, outside of maybe Georgia, which is scary to think about. But, I mean, we talked about just how bad things were in game one against Florida State, take it all the way to the end against Purdue. And yes, I know in there you had the loss at A&M, which was, you know, very disappointing and took your chance of getting to a college football playoff out of the picture. Although in hindsight, right, beating Georgia was going to be very challenging no matter what. So it's not
Impossible.
like I was going to say, and it's not like even if you win the A&M game, I don't know that it changes anything in terms of if you beat Georgia. Certainly, maybe mindset's a little bit different going into this one, but as we said, Georgia's just on a different level outside of what a couple quarters against Ohio State, um, and a couple quarters against Missouri. Really, I mean that was kind of their season, wasn't it? And but I look at it from LSU standpoint. Think about the progress Jaden Daniels made. Just think about the game they lost to Tennessee, and you're really at that point wondering, all right, maybe this is just kind of a team that's going to kind of wind up, maybe in that middle of the SEC West pack, which wouldn't have surprised any of us. But from
Mm-mm.
there, what do? They just start reeling off wins. They score a lot of points. Their defense gets it done in a game like the one they had at Arkansas, where they just kind of have to will their way to a victory. And so, yeah, I mean, that was program ahead of schedule. Again, this was a team, as you pointed out before, some people were picking last in the West, and they won the West. And yeah, I don't think you could ask for sort of a better, outside of losing the game at A&M, to possibly have a win and end scenario against Georgia in the SEC championship game. Sure, there were a couple of disappointing games along the way, but in terms of the overall progress, I think that they may have been the most improved in the SEC outside of, as I said, Georgia, which is really scary. So
Okay, we had a split opinion next. Tennessee ends up 3, Alabama 2, and of course, Georgia 1. And if you're going to take the computers or body of work, you could argue Alabama deserves to be there. The computers all have Alabama a little higher than Tennessee. Of course, you could say, well, each team went 11-2 and 6-2 overall. They played head to head, and Tennessee won that game. You could also say that was in Knoxville. On the other hand, if you're Alabama, you can say, hey, we lost 2 games on the last play of the game. Otherwise, we would have been unbeaten, whereas Tennessee had an awful loss to South Carolina in Columbia and also got beat double digits at Georgia. So pick your poison, whether you want to go head to head or those other things. But where it settled for us, and again, there was a difference of opinion. I would have ranked Tennessee 2. We go Tennessee 3, Alabama 2, Georgia 1.
yeah, I mean, again, it is a composite ranking, and between all of us, that's how it wound up being. And I mean, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, right? I mean, Tennessee fans and Alabama fans can argue about that, but both of their ultimate goals was to be where Georgia's at. And so, you can argue the 2 or 3, but it's, again, Alabama, you're always trying to be 1. Tennessee, the thought is you've always had the potential to get to 1, but now you're actually seeing it realized where you're back in that conversation. And I think that was certainly the biggest win for Tennessee this season, is not just the fact that you were right there and did control your destiny up until the South Carolina game. They were sitting right there with a chance perhaps to get into the playoff. We talked about all the wacky scenarios they could play out and such, but I mean, that's kind of what it comes down to is Tennessee clearly exceeded expectations. And so if you want to rank them 2 or 3, I don't know how much it matters, just because given where I think most people thought they would be at, as I said, I was the high man on Tennessee coming into the season, but I don't know that I expected at one point Tennessee to be ranked number 1 in the college football playoff, heading into that Georgia game. And so when you look at it as a whole, the offensive system is what it is. I mean, it's on a different level. And it's just one of those things that I think is going to carry this program forward, no matter who is it quarterback? No matter kind of what the weapons look like, it's clear Josh Heupel has something that works very effectively. And as they continue to rebuild in different areas, I'm sure they'll look at it and say, yeah, we need to fix some things defensively. And beyond that, there are other things we can do better. But still, I mean, look at where Tennessee is now, where they were not long ago, and what a program changing season. I think that's the best way to put it. I mean, it's one that changes your program for the better. And of course, Alabama, you're always going to be disappointed when you're not in the college football playoff. But at the same time, do we really have a lot of questions about the future of Alabama football? As long as Nick Saban's there, he's going to continue to reload. And the only difference now is what, Chris? It's not
He's
Alabama's
not the
league
guy on
anymore.
top. Yeah.
It's not Alabama's league anymore. It's Georgia's league, and that's the difference now. And so, as Saban continues to move forward, and they continue to try to change things, the question now becomes, can they, get back to being the old Alabama, which is basically the new Georgia? I mean, that's the most fascinating question. And right now, if we look at number one, we've already looked ahead to, I don't remember when we discussed it. We were looking ahead before the championship. We're looking at that schedule next season. And look, it's a long time away. Well, Georgia maybe have a game where they slip up, or where they have a game where they don't look great. Who knows? We'll see what happens once we get there. But
Yeah, because teams always do. I mean, they had one
right.
against, who was it, Kent State this year?
Yeah, Missouri against it. I mean, yeah. So it's like, you remember, we're gonna look at that going into the season. And again, injuries can impact that and everything. But as of right now, I mean, don't look now, other SEC fans, but like, I'm not, I know there are gonna be people saying, well, there's no way they can do it 3 times in a row. I'm here to tell you
They might.
that I'm here to tell you that if you look at their schedule, they could absolutely do it 3 times in a row. And that, again, that goes beyond the Alabama discussion, right? That goes into all-time historical discussion if we're sitting there
Dynasty.
doing
Yeah.
this next season. So, yeah.
Well, and just as a sidebar, the whole schedule your way to a playoff is the reason I think we need 12 teams, and I'm glad we have it, among other things. Now, Georgia's good enough to get there regardless. Although you could Alabama yourself like they did this year. You play a couple of tough games, the bounces don't go your way, and
Well,
and the season goes differently. So
you could also see Georgia play a team that is worse than TCU and beat them by more points, and that could be a playoff game too. But
Yep.
I just, man, and it's funny, right?
65-7. That's just so absurd.
I know you guys talked about it last night, and I'm sure you talked about this in depth, but the whole Kirby using the everyone doubted us thing. In a sense, I know people are making fun.
Really, everybody doubted you?
Well, you know what?
Really?
And I was going to say this, like, in a sense, I understand how ludicrous that sounds, but if you remember some of the conversation that was had, and we were among that, Chris, you and I specifically were among this conversation. I don't know if Blaine was or not, but we talked about, hey, they've got a lot to replace. Like, they got a lot of guys replaced, but they got a lot of talent to bring it in. But let's just point out, they do have a lot they've got to replace. Now, that was a conversation we had.
God forbid
before September 3. So
when you're looking at a team that loses an unprecedented 15 guys to the NFL, have some questions about how that could go.
Well, but I was going to say, we had all those questions before September the 3rd. But once the season actually kicked off,
it on Oregon.
I don't think there was a lot of doubting after September the 3rd. So if that's Kirby's timeline, I'm perfectly fine with that. But beyond that, and look, hey, there were some people, there was some doubting going on after Kent State and Missouri. Let's not ignore that either. So he's not wrong if you pick the right parts of the season. But overall, I think once they got rolling, I don't think anybody was doubting this Georgia team. So
my favorite Kirby Smart moment of the season came at halftime of the title game, because Georgia's winning that one 35-7, and every Georgia fan out there's got to be turning backflips. Or what was it, 38-7? I don't know. It was
38.
It's over. Yeah. And I'm just thinking, what is he going to say? Because, like, if he's being honest, he's going, we just kicked the
Yeah.
out of the number 2 team in the playoffs by virtue of getting there in the first.
Yeah.
I'm like, how can he spin this? Because he's not going to come out and say, "Hey, we played a fantastic half of football and blah blah blah." And so you look at him and he's got this look on his face like, well, we haven't been a good third quarter team all year. Like, well, there you go. That's how
Hey,
Kirby Smart
but
flips
but
the
let's
page.
let's honestly, and some people are going to point this out. Okay, let's be honest too. Like some teams need things to break their way.
That's true.
Georgia needed things to break their way against Ohio State to even be here, and you can say, oh well, somebody's going to catch. But I think what you realize is like that is true, but when you look at the full picture, you just realize how just how ridiculously good this team was and
Yeah.
could be. And, you can say, well, TCU shouldn't have been there. Well, I'm not buying that. They got there. Like, you can say whatever
Beat
you want.
Michigan.
Like,
Michigan was unbeaten in the Big
yeah,
Ten.
come on. Like, I think you could say that, but you
It
know
was a
what?
terrible matchup. I think 3
Yeah,
defensive linemen against that offensive line. If Georgia's able to just whip you physically, then it's over. As long as
yeah.
Georgia doesn't make mistakes, and that's how it went down.
But that's the nature of sports, right? Is think about how
Right.
different our conversation is if Ohio State makes the kick and it's Ohio State and TCU in the national championship, and Georgia's run has ended, but didn't work out that way, and now they're sitting there. Was Kirby Smart used they were ready to hunt last night? Well, they're going to be out ready to hunt for another championship. And oh, by the way, I think they picked up a couple good players as well here already for the team for next season that are going to be joining. And I'm pretty sure we've seen some of those guys in the SEC, haven't we? So,
I think we have
all right. So there you go. So that
some
will
pass catchers that have
uh,
been recycled.
there you go. Georgia wins.
Georgia wins. Georgia always wins lately. All right. Well, you can win by hitting the subscribe button, hitting the like button. That helps us out. We got a lot of content coming. We've got a ton of basketball stuff just about every day. We're going to continue football content into the offseason. Of course, with baseball. When it gets here, best way to hit all that is hit that subscribe button.
Quickly, Chris, just a quick
Yes.
tease. We do have the state of the
Oh,
programs coming.
yes.
So I want to just, for the football fans, because I know some of you football fans, I know what you're seeing. You're seeing a lot of basketball videos go up and you're saying, what's going on here? Well, obviously, there weren't as many games. We have a lot of basketball to cover. Like, you know how it works. But as Chris said, we're going to football. I know the season's over now as of Tuesday, but like
Football season's never over in the
we have
SEC.
months of stuff that we already are planning out. So what we're going to have coming up in the next kind of round of football stuff, we're going to do our state of the programs. So what we're going to do, it kind of ties into some of the stuff we talked about on here. We're going to look at each of the programs, kind of where things are at. Certainly look at some of the key moves that have already been made. Look ahead, just where is the program at in relation to where they should be and all that stuff. We're going to do that for all 14 teams. So there's 14 videos right there. Then, of course, we'll start looking at some of the key transfer portal additions. We'll kind of rank those. We'll rank maybe the top freshmen you're going to see coming into the league next season. We'll start ranking some of the biggest games on the schedule next season, as well as, once we get closer, we'll look at spring practice previews for every single team. So think about everything I just said. You're talking 50 plus videos right there coming your way. So be sure to hit that subscribe button. We got a lot of stuff on the way.
Thanks for watching us at Southeastern 14. He's Blake Lovell. I'm Chris Lee. We'll see you again soon.